Or do they have the quarterback yet? No. Is the roster perfect yet? No. But how they've invested in the draft and how they've invested in free agency, adding specifically in the trenches with Aidan, Ali McNeil, Nay Sewell, it has been impressive to see just how much they've done a good job at this like legitimate long-term rebuild while maintaining a culture and a buy-in that.
We talked last time about how this was made, the experience going through the entire journey of the Michigan football season. Is this something you guys felt was, I would say, full circle? The Michigan boy, divine child to Michigan, sits the first few years, doesn't get much playing time, explodes onto the scene. They finally beat Ohio State, just like in the episode Doc, how big of a moment that really was for the program. And then now drafted by the Detroit Lions hometown team. Kind of walk us through how this all came together.
Yeah, it definitely feels full circle, right? It's a guy that has had his parents and his sisters go to every single game dating back to high school. So to stay in Detroit is a massive win for him and a massive win for his family. It's also a massive win for the Lions, right? And that was evident in how quickly they turned in the card for Aidan Hutchinson, who is a culture changer and not in what's going to be a culture that doesn't necessarily need to be changed, right? I was talking recently, and the Detroit Lions were picking number 2 overall for a reason. They lost a lot of football games, but they have what not a lot of losing teams have in the NFL. I would say no losing team has in the NFL, and that is buy-in into a culture and into a head coach and Dan Campbell that people can see a long-term vision for and a long-term winning strategy for. Do they have the quarterback yet? No. Is the roster perfect yet? No. But how they've invested in the draft and how they've invested in free agency, adding specifically in the trenches with Aidan, Ali McNeil, Nay Sewell, it has been impressive to see just how much they've done a good job at this like legitimate long-term rebuild while maintaining a culture and a buy-in that not even winning teams have sometimes.
Absolutely. Austin, speaking of the draft, the Lions moved up on the board to pick number 12 to grab Jameson Williams, who, again, if he doesn't get injured, that's likely the first wide receiver taken off the board. His metrics in terms of agility and speed are off the charts. Walk Detroit fans through just exactly the player they're getting, and not just in Jameson Williams, but overall the first round haul. I would say outside of maybe the Jets and the Ravens, maybe even the Giants, the Lions had as good of a first round as anybody, Austin.
100%. I mean, obviously starts with Aidan Hutchinson, and then this trade up where they give up essentially the 34th overall pick in the 2022 NFL draft to move up from 32 to 22, and they move up from 66 to 46 on day 2. Essentially 2 trade ups, 20 spots for 1 second round pick. The 34th overall pick is obviously more valuable than most second round picks, but still, it is incredible process from the Detroit Lions GM to identify a insane talent in Jameson Williams that's only available at 12 because he did get hurt. And it's not just because he got hurt in the last game of the season. You get hurt in the national championship, that's gonna like lead to a later rehab and all that type of stuff. But he is transcendent in his ability. He is easily the best mover of any receiver in this class. He's more than a speed type. And people go back to, how come he couldn't beat Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave out at Ohio State? He was getting open. It was just a lot of mouths to feed in that offense, right? So I do think that going up and getting Jameson Williams, especially considering the price they paid, not giving up a future first, is such phenomenal process from Brad Holmes, the GM there. And then you're getting an insane talent for when this quarterback position does solve itself, right? And you look ahead to 2023, it's a very good quarterback class. Bryce Young of Alabama, C.J. Stroud of Ohio State. And then you even look at the veteran quarterbacks that obviously like rotate every offseason now. The Lions are a desirable destination. Like, this is a team that has a good offensive line, that is investing in the defensive line, has, secondary help, and receiving core now with Jameson Williams that's going to get better. So I'm really impressed with how the Lions have approached these last 2 off seasons and just what they're aiming towards and where their trajectory is as they move forward.
Let me address one thing. You said, how come he didn't surpass Olave and Garrett Wilson at Ohio State? And 2 people do bring that up. But they also have to understand that the coaches have a philosophy of, if it ain't broken, we're not going to change it. There's a pecking order, and they don't, if Ohio State is winning, even if Williams is a better wide receiver, he's not going to pass them by because, 1, we're still winning. B, these are the guys that we picked. They haven't done anything to lose their job, so we're not going to switch that pecking order around. That happens too sometimes. It may not be because Williams was just, 2 or 3 shades worse than these guys. It was just that, hey, we're not going to switch it.
100%. I mean, it's not that dissimilar to Kenneth Walker, who's a transfer from Wake Forest and then won the Doak Walker Award, right? Like, there are a lot of transfers that had success this past year. Jermaine Johnson transferred from Georgia, who has like NFL talent up and down that defensive line to Florida State and had a lot of success. I think Jameson Williams saw an opportunity to be the guy at Alabama and made a decision to move. And then you go back to Ohio State. It's not just Jackson Smith-Njigba, Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave. They got Marvin Harrison Jr. on that team. They got a ton of talent on that Ohio State receiving corps. So it was difficult for anyone to crack the roster, especially with Chris Olave was the older player, right? He was the guy that was going to get the opportunities as he moved closer to his senior year. And Garrett Wilson obviously had more opportunities ahead of Jameson Williams as well. My thought is, even if Jameson Williams takes a redshirt year this year and isn't able to come back, say, until week 8, week 10, or something along those lines, it's still such a valuable add for a Detroit Lions team that's obviously on the upward trajectory, looking to build a receiving corps, not for this year, right? They're not looking to be Super Bowl competitive this year, but for the near future.
Austin, PFF gave the Detroit Lions an A+ for their draft. Obviously, their first 3 picks, Aidan Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, and Josh Pascal, by the way, who had the highest PFF grade coming out of the SEC in terms of edge rushers. Could you walk us through the evaluation of a Josh Pascal, why that pick was such maybe an underrated pick? A lot of Detroit fans are not familiar with Josh Pascal. Kentucky, really a program that just now emerged over the last really 2 seasons, and they had their breakout year this year. Very underrated in the SEC. This is a guy that produced in one of the most difficult conferences, if not the most difficult conference in all of college football.
Yeah, Josh Pascal is underrated because he doesn't have the play style, right, of some of these really bendy edge defenders, right? He plays with power, he plays with his hands, and he also has a lot of inside-outside versatility. He was used very similar to how Trayvon Walker was used at Georgia, in that he was head up or inside the tackle a lot of Kentucky, because he's got really good size. Like, he could play on the inside or on the outside. He has that versatility for you. But I also think it gets underrated how athletic he is. He wasn't Trayvon Walker levels or Aidan Hutchinson levels, but he still was a phenomenal athlete when he tested, especially when considering his size. His 10-yard split, way more impressive when you go back and look at some of that testing. So Josh Pascal, for me, is a guy that, again, you look at the Detroit Lions and what they've done to invest in such a deep defensive line. Aidan Hutchinson, Josh Pascal in this year's draft. Last year, Levi Muzarike, Aleem McNeil, both the Aquara brothers, Charles Harris. It is absurd how much they've really made an effort to build up that defensive line, not just with starters, but rotational depth in a league where that is so important to have rotational guys and guys with specific skill sets, right? John Pinacini, the defensive tackle there, is not a pass rusher. But if you get him on early downs, he can be one of the better run defenders in the NFL. And having that rotation of skill sets and that uniqueness in your defensive line is rare. You could argue it's the deepest defensive line in the NFL. It's easily one of the ones that's been invested in the most. That is really impressive to me. And I think it's intentional from Detroit to continue to invest in those areas.
Is there anybody third day draft picks from the Lions that excite you, that you think, you know what, here's a guy or guys that could really contribute? Not saying they have to start, but they can contribute next season.
Yeah, I mean, looking through their draft, I like Kirby Joseph a lot. I know that wasn't day 3, but I think he was late in the rounds at 97. He's a guy that maybe has some of the best ball skills of any of the defensive backs in this class, and really good length. And I like his size to play in the box. I think he's versatile enough to play other positions as well. After that, I think Malcolm Rodriguez is an interesting player. Oklahoma State off-ball linebacker that's tiny and lack of size at off-ball linebacker is okay when you're a really good athlete. He's not in that elite tier, but I really do like Malcolm Rodriguez a lot as a football player, right? He's a special teams ace. I think that's his floor in the NFL, because that's just the type of player he is. I don't see a lot of impact players in their day 3. I think where they really hit home runs was day 1, day 2.
Absolutely. Austin, before we let you go, I do want to revisit Hutch. This obviously the podcast going on with the story of Aidan Hutchinson. It starts early on. Obviously, his journey, his family. Episode 2, things get really interesting, right? Discussing how Aidan got to this point, right? A lot of people say, well, this is a 1-year breakout player. We've seen this with Joe Burrow just in recent history. But could you walk the audience through really what it is to be a player that you have to develop, you have to wait for your moment, and then when it finally comes, yes, you take advantage of it, but do NFL teams punish these type of players who only produce 1 year in college? And 2, I think it's important for people to understand it was Josh Uche, it was Chase Winovich, it was Rashawn Gary, it was Devin Bush. He was behind some very talented edge players at Michigan.
I think it's also important to call out, too, though, as a true freshman, I talked to his defensive coordinator there, Adham, and he said, I needed him to be on the football field. He did not take a redshirt year. Like, he wanted him to play early in his Michigan career as a 4-star, right? This guy's not some 5-star freak. He's a 4-star that still isn't taking a redshirt year with one of the deepest defensive lines in college football. Josh Uche, Chase Winovich, Rashawn Gary, they had so much talent on that defensive line, and he still didn't redshirt his true freshman season and had good production playing on the inside. They asked him to add weight above like 270, 275, and he got down to 260 behind this previous year, and that's a big reason for his breakout as well. And then you go from 2018 to 2019, he's still playing on a really deep defensive line. Kwity Paye, all these guys that are still there, Josh Uche, who are going to be highly drafted picks and still getting opportunities in 2019. Go back and watch the 2019 season Michigan versus Iowa game. You'll see Aidan Hutchinson be one of the few players in the country that could actually get into Tristan Wirfs' pads and make plays. Then in 2020, 6 snaps into the third game of the season, he breaks his ankle. One of the worst injuries, one of the biggest pieces of adversity in his life. Then he was going to go into the draft last year, right? If he didn't get hurt and played a full 2020 season, COVID impacted, gets hurt, makes this decision to come back, gets down to 260 and lights it up. I do think that there's a lot of context to like his journey at Michigan and what all culminated to what was obviously an absurd season this past year.
Well, Austin, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really, really appreciate it. Everybody at home, make sure you check out the 4-episode series labeled Hutch. You can find it on any podcast platform. It is a 4-part episode series. Austin, thank you so much again. Check out Austin on the Tailgate podcast, of course. Make sure you check out PFF on their YouTube channel. And again, take a listen to the story of Aidan Hutchinson.
I'm going to check that out before I check out Winning Time again. So I'm ready.
It was a great listen. I really enjoyed it. It gives you perspective